The overall picture suggests that current developments are not accidental, but rather the manifestation of a new power struggle shaped by 19th century geopolitical reflexes. This raises a fundamental question. Where is this strategy leading the international system? In this video, we examine step by step the global order that the United States appears to be attempting to restructure. Donald Trump's simultaneous targeting of Cuba, Colombia, Mexico, Greenland, and Iran signals a significant escalation in U.S. foreign policy behavior. These actions should not be interpreted merely as isolated diplomatic threats against individual states. Rather, they constitute a broader assertion of power that challenges the structural boundaries of the existing international order. On January 3rd, following reports of explosions and aircraft activity in Caracas, the Venezuelan government accused the United States of striking civilian and military targets. Trump subsequently declared that a large-scale operation had been conducted against Nicolas Maduro, and that both Maduro and his spouse had been removed from the country. Concurrently, the U.S. Department of Justice announced serious criminal indictments against Maduro and his wife, indicating a coordinated deployment of military, legal, and psychological instruments of pressure. Trump explicitly revived a 21st century reinterpretation of the Monroe Doctrine, which historically defined Latin America as the natural sphere of U.S. influence, referring to this updated approach as the Monroe Doctrine. This discourse represents a continuation of earlier warnings directed at Venezuela, Colombia, and Cuba. Within the same strategic framework, Trump also emphasized the necessity of Greenland for U.S. national security. In Colombia, President Gustavo Petro responded to Trump's statements by calling for regional unity among Latin American states. Trump, in turn, accused Petro of involvement in cocaine trafficking and suggested that a U.S. operation against Colombia could be considered a good idea. Mexico was similarly warned on the grounds of narcotics trafficking. Trump asserted that during each bilateral engagement, he proposed the deployment of U.S. troops to Mexico, citing the extraordinary power of drug cartels. Regarding Cuba, Trump argued that direct military intervention was unnecessary, claiming that the country was already on the verge of systemic collapse. He further asserted that Cuba's economic dependence on Venezuelan oil rendered it particularly vulnerable to disruption. Greenland emerged as one of the most revealing elements of this strategic picture. Trump reiterated his interest in controlling the island, framing it as being encircled by Russian and Chinese naval activity. The principal factor unifying these cases within a single strategic framework is that all of them represent critical geopolitical choke points located in the United States' immediate sphere of influence. When energy resources, subsurface wealth, and transportation corridors are incorporated into this analysis, a new near-abroad imperial belt becomes discernible during the Trump era. U.S. foreign policy, in this context, appears to be reactivating a 19th century model of expansionist and hierarchical geopolitics, in which energy, minerals, and security are deployed simultaneously as components of a single strategic package. The inclusion of Iran further reinforces this interpretation, introducing an additional zone of strategic importance in terms of energy security and geopolitical control for the United States. Given that Venezuela, Saudi Arabia, and Iran collectively possess the largest proven oil reserves globally, the strategic pressure exerted on Iran and Venezuela becomes particularly intelligible from an energy-centered perspective. Another shared characteristic of these cases is their location within the Western Hemisphere and their role as the initial arena of U.S.-China strategic competition. From Washington's viewpoint, efforts by China and Russia to expand their influence in these regions are perceived as existential threats to U.S. hegemony, analogous to how European powers were viewed during the 19th century. The Greenland-Arctic axis constitutes one of the most critical nodes of geopolitical competition in the 21st century. The Arctic has become a focal point of long-term great power rivalry due to emerging maritime routes, strategic energy reserves, and rare earth mineral resources. For the United States, the Arctic is not merely a peripheral geographic frontier. It represents a geostrategic axis in which power projection, maritime security, and global energy supply chains are being reconfigured. The U.S. Department of Defense characterizes the Arctic as a theater of intensified strategic competition and emphasizes the necessity of constructing new alliance-based security architectures in response to growing Sino-Russian cooperation. Trump's current policies should not be interpreted as novel or unprecedented. Sanctions against Venezuela, pressure on Iran, and interest in Greenland were all present during his first presidential term. Accordingly, contemporary developments should be understood not as temporary or conjunctural, but as part of a broader strategic message directed at the international system. The United States appears to be seeking to reconstitute its immediate geopolitical environment as a renewed imperial security belt. Ultimately, beneath the language of security, values, and geopolitical rivalry lies a far more consistent historical driver: money and material power. Throughout history, wars, interventions, and strategic realignments have rarely been fought for abstract ideals alone. They have been fought to control resources, trade routes, energy flows, and financial leverage. From oil reserves and rare earth minerals to shipping lanes and strategic chokepoints, the regions discussed in this analysis represent not merely geopolitical spaces, but economic arteries of global power. Security discourse, ideological framing, and diplomatic pressure function largely as instruments that legitimize deeper economic objectives. In this sense, what we are witnessing today is not a break from history, but its continuation. The struggle for power remains inseparable from the struggle for wealth. And behind every great geopolitical confrontation, the logic of capital quietly endures.